Thank you to Group 6 for their presentation on this film. Let's dive into a bit more detail. So the first question, these men of authority. Group 6 talked about our main character, Dr. David Huxley. He is supposedly a famous researcher. He looks like a serious guy. He looks like he knows what he's doing. But as Group 6 said, the film portrays him as kind of funny. In other words, he's reacting in ways that seem kind of silly. In the example Group 6 played, he's uh, so focused on pointing out that this is his car, not her car. He doesn't realize what's going on until the car under his feet starts moving away. So this is what today we call the archetype of the addle-brained professor, a researcher or expert who is so focused on their own special knowledge that they kind of don't really understand the rest of the world. And so when David meets somebody so full of life, like Susan, he doesn't really know what's going on, and he doesn't know how to deal with Susan on an equal level. Something similar happens for Major Applegate. So this is Susan's aunt's guest, the guy who keeps making the leopard call, right? He says that he's a big game hunter. He has a lot of experience hunting like leopards and other wild animals. But honestly, he doesn't feel like a hunter, right? He feels like an old man. Um, so here's another man who supposedly is an expert and has lots of experience, but in his portrayal in the film, doesn't seem to carry a lot of authority. If, for instance, you pay attention to his conversation, it always follows somebody else. He doesn't seem to have his own proactive interest in talking about things. In the dinner scene, he brings up his stories as a hunter, but that's because Susan's aunt wants him to talk about hunting to David. And then when he's talking with Susan's aunt, whatever she says, he goes, yes, yes, or indeed. He always follows other people, which is very strange because usually that's not how we think about hunters, right? Hunters are active, they're strategic, they're cunning, they always plan ahead, that kind of thing. Applegate is not like that. And so, in fact, because he's always following other people's conversation, there are a number of times where in the middle of talking, he himself gets confused. He means to say this, but instead he says that, the opposite of what he wanted to say. It's also kind of funny because he says that he is an expert in how a leopard sounds, and yet every time the leopard in the movie like gives off the roar, he always thinks that it's a bird and not a leopard. Some expert, right? So again, here's a guy who gets um, he's kind of unable to keep himself straight. He mixes things up, and that's also a source of humor in this film. Finally, we have the constable, the policeman, the guy in charge of the jail. He is more active. He has a plan, but in his interrogation, right, whenever he's asking like Susan or asking David questions, he's very easily sidetracked on specific details. And often he will only later realize, wait, that's not the main point. We're talking about this. And Susan observes this and uses this to escape, right? She creates a situation where the constable is very eager to write down what she says. And when he goes to check the details of what she says, she gets away. And that's also kind of funny because, we know that when policemen uh, build a case, they're not just collecting evidence, they're also interpreting that evidence. They're always thinking about what could these clues mean. And so the constable already has his interpretation. He already thinks that these are a group of criminals and nobody can change his mind. So Susan realizes this, and therefore she pretends to be part of this group of criminals, and thereby uh, puts the constable kind of at ease, so that he's not always so worried about what they're going to say or what they're going to do. And that's how she creates the situation. So here's another man who has authority and feels like he has authority, but he's still so stuck on how he uses that authority, the details of his authority, that he also misses the bigger picture and lets Susan get away. And these are the three main men in the film. I find that quite interesting. In, usually in a regular film or like a drama, if you have a professor, they have some kind of authority. If you have a hunter, he also has some kind of authority. But in comedy, these expectations are reversed, and that's what makes it that these characters funny. So we can look at this in two ways, and we can combine this question with the next question: how would you describe Susan? As Group 6 said, Susan is not what you usually would expect of a young woman. Um, she represents a different way of thinking about strong, independent women in society. Um, but they also used a few words to describe her. They called her brave, upright, kind, and uh, what was it, vivid or energetic or something like that? Sorry? Sorry? Lively. Yes, lively. So of course I agree that Susan is lively. I might even agree that Susan is brave when we talked about the word brave 2 weeks ago, right? You can say she wants David and so she does whatever she can to get him. That is quite brave. But I'm not sure why we would think that she's kind and upright. She does break a lot of rules and a lot of laws, right? And she doesn't seem to care too much about all the trouble she causes other people, including David. So, I mean, there are ways to think of Susan as kind and upright, but I don't think it's very obvious. In any case, Susan as a woman is not what we would usually expect of a woman like that, just like the men are not what we would expect of men in their positions. So, this reversal of gender expectations in a comedy, we can look at this in two ways. One way is um, it's a different way of portraying men and women, and that perhaps this is a good thing for disrupting our gender stereotypes, even subverting them. But another way to think of this is this kind of reversal only makes sense in a comedy. It's like comedy is a different kind of world. And so it's not our world, it's not our society. We look at it across a distance as pure entertainment, not necessarily as a kind of representation or a kind of role model. So, on the one hand, yes, it's different. But on the other hand, the fact that it's comedy takes away from some of that power. So, question two, the quote here, a spoiled, conceited little scatterbrain. Group 6 says this is because David is mad at her. And so, because she doesn't fit the gender stereotypes. Um, he feels like she's very different, very strange, and because he's angry, so this is how he scolds her. So it's not necessarily true. Well, we can look at these four words, right? Spoiled, conceited, little, scatterbrained. First of all, of course, she's not little. Little is here used as an insult. Is she spoiled? Maybe. We know that her family has money, but we also know that she herself does not have that much money because she's trying to gain her aunt's $1 million. Um, so it's possible she grew up in a rich household and that's why she does not fit the usual gender stereotypes. You know, when you have money, you have more freedom, you have more opportunities, you have more experiences. And so what we usually think of as like masculine and feminine stereotypes in a patriarchal society are often connected with freedom and opportunities. So, like people who fit the masculine stereotypes often have more freedom and opportunities than people who fit the feminine stereotypes in a patriarchal society. So, because Susan fits more of the masculine stereotypes, uh, it does perhaps tell us that she grew up with more freedom and opportunities. The word spoiled means that maybe she grew up with too many opportunities and too much freedom. So it's a very subjective word. I do believe David understands her situation and thinks of it as not a good thing. And that's why he calls her spoiled. And this is the main point that Group 6 was trying to say, which is uh, it's she is like this, but is it good or is it bad depends on the person. Conceited. Conceited usually means arrogant. Arrogant, I think, here means that she doesn't care a lot about other people. And this I do have to agree with. She basically breaks many rules and causes a lot of trouble simply trying to keep David interested in her or make David interested in her. Um, that is a bit conceited. And then finally, scatterbrain, which means unable to focus. Whatever you think of, you immediately say or you immediately do. This is more complicated because at the end of the film, as we just saw, she tells David, in order to keep him, she did whatever came into her head. So she's intentionally a scatterbrain. So paradoxically, that actually means she has a lot of focus. She is able to focus on not being focused. And if you are like a perfectionist, you'll know that it's very hard to stop being a perfectionist. Okay, question 3. Yes, motivation is love at first sight. Does it make sense? Group 6 didn't really answer this question. They gave us evidence showing that uh, she, you could see that she's trying to keep David interested and always keep him guessing, etc. But the motivation itself, love at first sight, does it make sense to explain all of her behavior with this motivation? It could. And I think this is what Group 6 was trying to say. Like, if we understand that she loves him and wants to keep him, then it kind of gives a new meaning to all of her behavior. She's not scatterbrained. She's not spoiled. She's just evil. She does whatever she has to get what she wants. But in another sense, like logically speaking, usually we would not want to. Well, okay, so maybe that's true. Let's say I personally would not want to be with someone who behaved like Susan behaves in the film. I guess some people would. I guess, according to the logic of the film, maybe David, who is like her opposite in personality, may become fascinated with this kind of, let's call it a wacky, uh, impulsive personality. It's exactly what he is not. Um, there's the saying, opposites attract. Not always true, but it could be true. So the motivation might make sense. And of course, love at first sight has no explanation. Why did she fall in love with David? No idea. It just happened. But the second part of the question, does it matter? Does it matter why she behaves like this toward David? I think the film itself tells us it doesn't matter because only at the very end, after she has basically ruined David's life, does the film tell us that she did it out of love. Which means for most of the movie, we have no clue why she's behaving like this. We might even agree with David that she's kind of crazy. And yet, people who enjoy this film would still enjoy the film in exactly the same way, even without knowing why Susan behaves like this. So, does the motivation really matter? For most of the movie, maybe not. Of course, by the ending, when we know that it's about love, it makes us have a more positive feeling rather than if she said, like, I'm here to take revenge from my father to ruin your life. The ending would feel very different. But for most of the movie, it doesn't really matter. She's just crazy and they have a lot of situations. Question 4, the title. Group 6 brought up some good ideas here. Of course, there's no real baby. So it's like the leopard is kind of having the same symbolic function as a baby might. So like a baby sometimes symbolizes the couple, the relationship. It brings the two people together. It keeps them together to take care of the child, and like how they behave toward the child and how they behave toward each other is connected. So the baby symbolizes their relationship. In this case, we don't have a baby, we have a leopard. But as group 6 said, the leopard also can symbolize their relationship. It's what they both um, are responsible for. It's what they both care about in some sense. It's what brings them together and keeps them together. Of course, at the very beginning, there was no leopard, right? At the very beginning, um, David had nothing to do with the leopard. That's purely on Susan's side. But Susan kind of drags David into the problem. There are also some other interesting things we can say here. For example, uh, the leopard is a cat, as Group 6 mentioned, and cats can be independent-minded and even unpredictable, kind of like Susan in this movie. She also behaves in a very idiosyncratic way, unpredictable, unlike anyone else. Um, we can also talk about the fact that leopards are usually wild animals. And especially in the Western tradition, a wild animal can be a symbol of the wild part of humans, the animal part of humans. And by animal, usually we mean things like basic desires for food, for sex, for sleep, uh, for excitement. And let's see, food. There's the scene where they feed baby, and of course they're always afraid of being eaten by baby. Sex, it's a romantic comedy. They don't actually have sex, but they form a relationship. There's also a sex joke at the very beginning that we just saw. I don't know if you caught it. David is holding the bone and says, "I think it goes in the tail." It's a sex joke because the tail is in it's your butt. And then Alice says, "No, we tried the tail yesterday. It doesn't fit." Anyway, so there is a sexual romantic aspect in the movie. Sleep. Basically the whole movie happens at night, right? Like 4/5 of the movie happens at night. They don't get sleep, which is also quite interesting, right? These are nighttime activities. And then excitement. Yeah, the whole thing is full of excitement. So yes, the fact that Baby is a leopard also highlights these aspects of the film. And this is also connected with the male characters, right? They're supposed to have authority, they're supposed to have expertise, but in the face of this wild animal and this wild couple doing wild things, their expertise, their education, their authority doesn't matter. It doesn't work in this kind of uh, world. Right. And then finally, the bringing up part, as Group 6 said, they don't really raise the leopard. The leopard doesn't learn from them. It's more like the leopard helps create their relationship. So it's not bringing up Baby. It's like the baby is bringing up them. Yeah, I think the title is called Bringing Up Baby mostly for the pun, 双关语. There isn't really a lot of bringing up of anything in this movie. I mean, you could also say that for most of the movie, Susan is behaving like a baby, as we said, like doing whatever she wants, apparently. Only at the very end do we learn that she had a plan. So you could also say that the film is um, it's showing David trying to control Susan and failing terribly. So it's kind of like how they are trying to control the leopard, and they have a hard time doing that for most of the movie. So in that reading, the baby would also refer to Susan. Bringing up babies, controlling Susan, just like they're controlling the leopard. And we should also talk about the fact that there are two leopards, right? There's another actual wild leopard in the movie. And that also highlights the fact that these are wild animals. And at the near the end, only Susan can actually control that wild leopard. And so we also see how the wild side of Susan's personality is highlighted by the fact that she can catch the wild leopard. She alone, only her. Okay, 5. Would it work if remade today in color? So Group 6 mentioned a good point. Black and white does seem to suit this film much better. First of all, because as they mentioned, it's in the tradition of black and white comedies from the early part of the 20th century. But we can also think about the logic of black and white. Um, the first, the Group 6 talked about the scene where they switch cars, right? Susan steals David's car, pretending like it's hers because they look very similar. But if we add color, would the cars look so similar? Maybe it would be easier to see some differences in color. Or maybe with color, you can see the shape better and the design would be more obvious as well. So black and white can also hide some details. Um, or it could make us focus on other things. So, for example, after they both fall in the water and they're sitting by the fire drying their clothes, they have a very interesting discussion. And as Group 6 pointed out, David at that point starts giving up, right? I don't care, do whatever you want. But if that scene were in color, then we would also be noticing the color of their clothes, the color of, in fact, their skin, of the leaves and the fire, and all of these details that don't really matter for the story. So black and white actually helps us focus on what the movie wants us to focus on. And then finally, we can also think about the fact that this is a screwball comedy, which usually, in this case, it's a slapstick comedy. Screwball means crazy person. So screwball comedy is a comedy where people behave in crazy ways. Slapstick is, if you look at the word, slap is, hitting somebody. Stick is a stick. So slapstick is a kind of comedy that's full of physical comedy, people getting hurt, falling down, hitting each other, whatever. So this is a slapstick comedy. And in a slapstick comedy, the people are treated more like objects. We don't pay as much attention to what they say. Instead, we often focus on what they do, how they interact with each other physically. And so black and white kind of makes the characters blend into the background. They look more like objects because the color does not separate them from their environment. And so it makes it easier to connect them with other objects when, for example, when two people run into each other and collide and fall down or whatever. It's easier to see them as objects instead of people if everything is black and white and the colors don't help you differentiate. So that could also be one more advantage of shooting this movie in black and white. White color maybe would not be a good idea. But there's also another part to this question. Remade today, not just in color, but using the film style that we are used to today. If you think about the film, most of it is medium or long distance. The camera doesn't move very much. It's the people moving and talking. We have uh, set situations and set locations. Of course, this is because back in those days, the technology was not as good. It was harder to move the camera. It was harder to do like more shots, close-up shots. The acting style was also different back then. The speaking style was also different because of, as we talked about, um, for Singing in the Rain, the speaking style is different because the microphones were not as good, etc. So if we remade this movie today, it wouldn't just be in color, a lot of other things would change. There's more freedom for filmmakers today to present different images, to use different special effects. But if we remade the movie in today's style, I do think that it would also distract from the main point. And the main point is two people running around getting into crazy situations. You don't really need uh too fancy editing or fancy camera work to grab that idea. What you really need is to put them in the same scene and let them do whatever. So in fact, this kind of focus is quite well presented using the older filmmaking style. The focus is on the people running around, not on the camera that is recording the images. So maybe if we remade it today, even in black and white, it probably would not be as good as the original. And well, I mean, even today, they're still making slapstick movies and screwball comedies. If you have a chance to watch some of these, usually now they're cartoons, like Minions, 小小兵 is the same kind of movie. And if you watch Minions, it's also full of medium shots of the characters doing crazy things. Not too much fancy camera work or special effects. Of course, animation, you have more freedom. They do things a bit differently, but mostly the style is very similar. Okay, although I do want to mention one of my favorite jokes in the Minions does depend on editing and camera work. It's at the very end where they're trying to prevent the villain from launching her robot or whatever, and one of the minions kind of goes, "Phew, relax," and then leans against the wall, but there's a button on the wall, and so he accidentally presses the button, and then he jumps back in surprise, and when he jumps back, he hits another button, and every reaction he presses another button, and even when he finally thinks he stopped and he sighs, 叹气, his breath goes into a machine that takes it for an order. And so it's actually another button. And that would be really hard to do if we don't have close-up shots of each individual button. But that's one of the few exceptions. Mostly it's just people running around fixed space. And also, if you want to do that kind of close-up style camera work, it's harder to do it with a real leopard. It would be easier if we had a CGI leopard. Hey, maybe they could do a slapstick with a CGI leopard, but CGI leopards look worse, right? You remember the new Lion King? 那个新的狮子王. The lions are terrible. It doesn't work. So yeah, probably you want to keep the real leopard. Okay, and then the last question, does the ending make sense? Group 6 says yes. They've been through a lot together. David has changed. He can appreciate Susan more. But I think it's interesting how uh, well, of course, at the beginning of the last scene, David does say, I love you. But then after the dinosaur collapses and Susan says, you still love me, don't you? At the very end, he kind of just like gives up and says, okay, fine, I still love you. So it does seem like he loves her and he wants to be with her because he has no choice. She has ruined his career. His fiancee Alice has left him. She's like the only person left in his life. So if he's not going to be with her, he's going to be alone. And that seems to be the push side. And of course, the pull side is they had a very exciting day together. And of course, she's rich and she's beautiful because she's played by Katharine Hepburn. So, like, in a sense, then the ending does work, but only because it's by process of elimination, 删去法. He doesn't have another choice. There is no other possible happy ending. So they might as well get together. Because usually if somebody ruins your career, you probably hate them, unless secretly in your heart you also didn't like your job anyway. But I do think David enjoyed what he did. So the fact that she ruined his career and yet he loves her, it shouldn't be that straightforward, right? It should be a struggle. I love her, but she destroys my life. Am I willing to give up what I have in order to be with her? But the film doesn't let him struggle. It just takes away everything. So that's his only choice left. Okay. Do you have questions or ideas about this movie? All right. So next week we're going to watch another one. Uh, and then the week after that will be another report. And then another, I think I'm skipping a week, right? What's going on in our course here? Okay, so today was presentation 6. We skipped. Did we skip two? We skipped 1 week, right? 台风延期是延1周还2周？1周嘛. Yeah, okay. So today is December 11th, presentation 6, film 7. Oh yeah, we have a holiday. That's why January 1st is a holiday. Okay, yeah. So we have two movies and one report left. Okay, see you next week.